Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Sunday, January 29th, 2017 edition of VR News. I love this picture because it reminds me of what I grew up with. And those of you Gen Xers like myself probably remember Saturday mornings because you'd wake up early, you and if you had siblings young enough with them, make some bad sugar bomb cereal, toast, whatever, bunker down in front of the TV set, 2 to 6 hours. Your parents would wake up and they would probably yell at you for sitting too damn close to the TV, despite having told you numerous times it's bad for your health. Then they kick your arses outside and tell you not to come back until dinner time usually. What I did not know, and Exity says he knew this, and I'm going to take that as a truth, but I did not. It's based on truth. And it amazes me because like the razor blade and Halloween candy, this stuff circulated back then as freely as it does now with the internet and social media and everything else. But yeah, in the mid-60s, General Electric manufactured a TV that had 100,000 times the safe dose of radiation. So yeah, that was a little alarming. Now, they fixed it. FCC cracked down on that. And since 1968, hasn't even been an issue. Yet it persisted. I was told that, most of my friends, and I'm sure many of you. But the part that I got a chuckle from, of course, is the HMD, because now the whole objective is to put it as close to your eyes as possible. So funny how these things come full circle, and then the original, horrible thing you weren't supposed to do, you have to do now to make it work. Next thing I want to talk about is the i7, specifically my i7. A few of you have asked just for an update on that. Has it helped with other stuff? Well, I talked about the video rendering, the photo stuff, all of that being faster. And I gotta say, yes, it's been awesome across the board. Gaming, virtual reality gaming, gaming in general, applications, everything just seems more responsive and smoother to me. Some of it's going to be psychosomatic. Absolutely, I get that, right? But here's an example. Elite Dangerous. Now, my thinking has always been hyperthreading really not going to benefit video gaming too much. I could swear, and I'm going to have to do the test side by side, that the star fields and gassy wisps of nebulae, when you do one of those jumps in Elite Dangerous, it seems more colorful, denser, meaning way more stars, more galaxies, more nebulae, all of that, while being super smooth. So yeah, it has blown me away. And if I had known this back then, instead of basing it on some, benchmarks that don't tell the whole story, I would have purchased it then. Easily. Yep, hands down. And the PlayStation 4 Pro, let's talk about that really quick. Was going to have that yesterday morning, but going to wait for non-mechanical hard drive so that, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it once and do it right. I don't want a mechanical drive in my PlayStation 4 Pro. As soon as I get that, the Pro gets purchased. Now, some interesting tidbits on Sony PlayStation's official blog that really paint the picture, I think, on why Guerilla Cambridge Studios, the devs for rigs, was closed down. So on this blog, Sony has their top everything lists. And if you look at the virtual reality games, you'll notice a title absent. In fact, many of the titles that I personally liked, so there's some kind of demo divide or taste divide somewhere, aren't represented. And the big one, of course, is this game, Rigs, not there on the top 10. Top downloads of December, there's one VR game there, Until Dawn, but again, no Rigs. Yes, it won awards, got a lot of accolades. People said it was great, but apparently nobody was frickin' playing the thing. So now that I've seen that, I think I can see a more complete picture. And in hindsight, yeah, it makes sense. I can get that now from a business point of view. Either way, there's some interesting ones on there. You guys can check that out. They've got their top 20 lists. They do some genre stuff. Just gives you some insight into PlayStation 4 tastes by public at large. Now, this next news story from Upload VR, they're making a comparison and asking, are Oculus and HTC the Apple and Microsoft of VR? Now, for me growing up, I've seen so many of these. I've touched on this in the past, but just a quick rundown, okay, of competitive marketing campaigns, etc. VHS versus Beta, Coke versus Pepsi, Atari versus Intellivision versus Coleco, Apple versus IBM, Commodore versus Atari, Spectrum versus Amstrad versus Commodore versus Atari, Nintendo versus Sega, Sega versus Nintendo versus Sony, Apple versus Microsoft. You can see there's been a few. There's tons more, but we'd be here forever. So I get where they're going with that. And if you look at that, I can see similarities between Oculus's store model and Apple's, along with some other things, i.e. rules for their devs. Definitely similarities. I think it's a bit more of a stretch making the HTC and Microsoft comparison, because you could equally argue that a lot of what they're accusing, the Oculuses and Apples for, they could levy against Microsoft. So not so sure I buy the second part of that, but what do you guys think? Now, augmented reality and virtual reality is probably, going to be a slower buildup than we originally anticipated. And we're going to see surveys and statistics and stories, etc. This is another survey. This one comes from VentureBeat. And I've been going to them increasingly more and more because they've had some excellent virtual reality news. Now, this survey is done or was done by a company called Forward. And according to them, they are a human capital solutions company focused on talent acquisition and development for innovation. Now, they conducted the survey to founders of augmented and virtual reality studios, whether it's software or hardware, and sent out hundreds. 70 people responded. So these statistics ultimately based on the input of 70 companies, entities, whatever you want to call them. So they talk about women playing a larger leadership role in the technology, that their data suggests that passion is what drives entrepreneurship, not the technical skills, but that technical skills guarantee employability. Some of these are kind of Captain Obvious because you're in a tech industry. You would hope that would be the case, unless you're looking for think tank type positions, then I would get that. Companies need to invest in training their workforce in both soft and hard skills. That leadership development is a big concern and priority, and that many US VR and AR companies are starting to look outside the US to hire. So definitely some interesting findings. Some of them, like the passion drives innovation, not money, that was based on 63% of respondents saying they love what they're doing, 29% saying VR is tough but worth it, and finally 4% saying it's tough to find money and talent. So you can take a look yourself. I'm not going to go through all of these. There's quite a few questions that were asked. I just thought those main 6 points were kind of interesting. This next news story from Road to VR has to do with big data visualization. One of the things I do in my job is mine data, report on data, and I try to do it in a way that simplifies the experience for the typical end user, meaning they don't have to be too tech savvy. Think pivot tables, but beyond that even. That's the kind of reporting I generally focus on. Business intelligence tools and stuff like Power BI, etc. What they're talking about here goes beyond your typical data. So, for example, generally companies would look at purchasing or sales history, top salespeople, top products, regions, all of that stuff is regular data. Pretty much any kind of database or visualization technique is going to be able to represent that. Your typical pie charts, your bar charts, etc. What these guys are doing, and this is based on NASA and Caltech research, is they are dealing with massive data sets and how to visualize that. Because when you're talking about billions of stars, for example, if you're trying to visualize or represent galaxies or exoplanets, genes, like human genomes, all of that kind of stuff, you're dealing with data sets so much larger than you normally do. So at the risk of not getting too technical, that's their whole claim to fame, is representing that in a user-friendly way. So you don't have to be super techy to understand. So very cool. And I get it's not gaming related, it's more businessy, but it's showing the strengths of virtual reality in a way more flexible way than we thought possible. Now, when I say we, that's the general we outside of us, because I think you and as the viewers and me here, we've talked about this quite a bit over the last few months and how important that is. But also we've talked about scenarios where we can really see the advantage of virtual reality. Surgeons being able to go right into the brain, literally. Their room scale is the brain. They can check things in the body prior to surgeries and all kinds of stuff. It's just an amazing technology that will eventually reach into so many different areas. So very cool article as well. Have a look, description below per normal. This next one I mention only because I got a lot of feedback from you guys that a lot of you were and are in fact exercising via virtual reality. Now I said at the time, for me, the way I sweat, it's super impractical. But still, it's doable. It's just a little messier than for most of you guys based on what you've told me. Now, Upload VR has come out with a list of their top 3 recommends for that, i.e. HMD exercising. They've listed Audio Shield as first. Now, based on Chris Brower, who I've talked about multiple times here, watching him in action on Audio Shield is amazing. It's like watching one of those break dancers from the 80s, just super complicated, technical, but make it look effortless. That's what he does with Audio Shield. Thrill of the Fight. And I'm going to tie that into the other boxing game that escapes me. We're going to talk about that probably in tomorrow's video. That one is more arcade-based. This one a bit more simulation, Thrill of the Fight, but requires foot movement, hand movement. Very involved physically. And then Hollow Point, the archery game. So very cool. Personally, I would have put Wrath of the Fire God on there. That, to me, second to Audio Shield, is the VR game that has me moving around the most. Easy. And this last news story, this is really informative in that it's Oculus themselves and TechCrunch. So it started as a TechCrunch story about Roomscale VR tracking and that it's still very problematic with the Oculus, the touch controllers, etc. They suggest, different scenarios and setups, but more importantly, they link back to Oculus, who on their own kind of update blog has listed steps for getting Roomscale to work properly. Now, I am probably about half a week away from getting my third camera. So when that comes in, I'm going to test their stuff, and I'll do a video on that specifically. But yeah, it's interesting stuff, and I like how Oculus presents it. They do it in a very straightforward, layman's terms way, but they illustrate exactly what you can expect and describe the tracking, benefits from doing something according to how they show it in a specific drawing, but they don't shy away from the negatives as well. So very good article from Oculus's own blog as well as via TechCrunch. All right, guys, that is it. Hopefully you guys had a kick-ass weekend. I did, but way too short per normal. Work again tomorrow. Cheers as always, guys.